Welcome to our latest Facebook Live webinar here on the Georgia Zone Credit Union page. I am Adam Schick, and today we are talking about financial tips for recent grads. And as much as I wish I was young enough to be considered a recent grad, I am not, which is why we have drafted Ashley Bird, who is the marketing manager and a recent-ish grad. Tell us, how recent are we talking about here, Ashley?
So as of this month, it has been 3 years since I graduated. I graduated in 2019 from Ole Miss.
So that's, I'm going to count that as recent-ish because you have the COVID years, which are sort of, it's almost like those didn't happen. So we'll just it's like 1 year in the real world, right? We're just skipping those 2 years.
Basically.
Well, Ashley, thank you for being with us. For everybody watching, we're going to cover a lot of topics that you would probably expect us to, talking about financial tips for recent grads, general questions that people would have when they hear that topic. We are always open to answering your questions as well to the best of Ashley's ability. So if you have questions, please do drop them in the comments below. And Marin, who is off camera but working hard to run the back end for us, will let us know what your questions are and how we can try and help you. If you're watching this after the fact, if you're watching the archive version of this and not live, you can still write questions in the comment section, and someone from the Georgia Zone social team will get back to you and again provide you with that information you're looking for. So Ashley, let's start with a basic question I think a lot of people have: budgets. How does one even begin to build the budget? If I just graduated and I'm like, okay, now I'm on my own, budgeting seems like a good place to start, but what does that look like?
So one helpful tool that I've found with budgeting is the 50-30-20 rule. So let me backtrack. You may not think you need a budget, but you absolutely need one. Budgeting is crucial to help your financial stability and help you save for major expenses like a new car or a house, or most importantly, paying off debt. And it's important to have, a general format set in place rather than just blindly budgeting. And so I have found that the 50-30-20 rule works best for me. So how it works is you set 50% of your income aside towards your needs, like your rent, your car payment, your mortgage, groceries, utilities, things that you absolutely need to survive. And then 30% of your income will go towards wants, things that are not essential, like going out to eat, vacations, sporting events. And that also includes upgrade decisions like buying a new car versus a used car. And then 20% will go towards your savings, like an emergency fund or contributing to your 401k, and especially paying off debt. I highly recommend having around $1,000 first in an emergency fund and then starting to tackle your high interest debt.
For when it comes to saving and putting money aside, I think there's a lot of people who maybe don't even think they have enough money coming in to do that. And that's another challenge when you're at that early stage of your career. You don't really have a lot to build on yet. And especially for people that are essentially living paycheck to paycheck, that could be a big challenge. So if you are in that situation, and even if you follow the 50-30-20, maybe the raw numbers still aren't big enough to do what you need them to do. How does one address that situation?
So it does seem kind of daunting, taking portions of your paycheck every single time and putting it towards savings or just something that you may not use right now. So one tool that I actually started using right when I graduated was, I found this on Instagram actually from another content creator, and it's taking the very end digit of your account balance at the end of the day and just putting that in your savings. So let's say you have $200.03 in your account. You would take $3 from your account at the end of the day and just put it aside. And it starts to add up really quickly, actually. That's how we ended up saving for our deposit on our apartment.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I feel like that's a good tangible tool, because when it is daunting and it is this kind of vague concept, that's a structure. That's something that anyone can do that's pretty straightforward. how long do you feel like it takes for that to be a meaningful number? Like, how much commitment do you have to that before it's going to really make a difference for you?
I think honestly, I mean, it took me personally a couple months of just really being consistent and putting $3 a day away or $5 or $7. And we ended up saving almost $1,000 towards our
Wow.
deposit. Yeah. We saved quite a bit of money just being consistent and putting just a few dollars away every day. It's honestly, in my opinion, way more doable.
It's interesting too, thinking about they didn't really have cell phones. They didn't have cell phone bills to worry about, right? There's other things we have now. But I do think it's interesting to consider that there are tools that people have that maybe they don't even realize. So how much of creating this budget, this plan, is just kind of tapping into stuff you may already know, but you just haven't thought about because you didn't have to?
So honestly, one helpful tool that I've used is Mint. And so a lot of these new budgeting apps, they will have different categories that you should budget for that you probably wouldn't think about. So in some of these, it'll have things like for if your car breaks down, setting money aside towards that, or your cell phone bill or a gym membership, different little categories that you may not think of. It has different places for you to account for that in your budget.
And there's so many ads you see now, especially for all of these. There's so many app-based companies that are offering banking. Obviously, Georgia's Own is in the credit union side. There's traditional banks people know about. Where would I even, if I have only had an account that was set up through my parents? And I still have one of my accounts is still labeled student checking because it was set up by my parents when I went to college, even if that was like 18 years ago. But it still says that. What kind of account should people be looking to open? Do I need a checking and a savings? Do I need them to be connected? Do I need to have, is it good to have everything in one place? Kind of talk through that process.
So you absolutely do need a checking account and a savings account. You definitely want to have a place where you can set your money aside. And for me personally, I have my checking account and my savings account all with one bank because I find it easier to just transfer quickly in between the two if I need to. But I know some people, if they have that temptation to dip into their savings, sometimes it's easier to have a checking account with one financial institution and then a check or a savings account with another, because it makes it a little bit harder to, just instantly transfer that money from your savings to your checking account. And it's also important to have a savings account that's maybe just for like a generic savings, for an emergency. And also maybe having another savings account, for a goal like paying for a new car or saving up for a down payment on a house. Having those separate savings accounts will also help, avoid the temptation of taking money from that savings and just putting it into your checking account.
One thing that I know comes up a lot, especially when you're establishing new accounts, is the idea of setting up overdraft protection. And I feel like a lot of people run into that. I've had it happen a couple of times just because you didn't remember to put the money in this account and it pulls from there. Can you talk about overdraft protection and the pros and the cons of that for people that are setting up new accounts and may not understand what that prompt is really about?
So overdraft protection, you can opt in for overdraft protection or you can just not have it altogether. And the main thing is that with overdraft protection, if you have that, you'll have to pay a fee, but it can definitely help save you from embarrassment. If you're at the gas station and you need gas, or if you're at the grocery store and you realize you don't have the money, then that can kind of help you get by. But it's not a tool that's meant to be used all the time just to cover you. Like,
right. It's an emergency. It's just for emergencies.
It's for emergencies, yes. And so it's really helpful in that aspect. Compared to if you don't have overdraft protection, then your account will just decline.
If you are just joining us here on Facebook Live, I'm Adam Schick, joined by Ashley Bird, marketing manager and recent-ish grad from Georgia's Own Credit Union. We're discussing all things financial tips for financial beginners. You're just on your way into the real world and you're you're looking for some guidance, that's what we're here to provide. If you have any questions, you're watching live, please, again, drop them in the comments and we will address those as soon as we see them. You can also share those after the fact. We will get to them. Someone on the Georgia Zone Social team will respond to those questions. We've talked about saving a little bit already, and I'm going to throw out a word that's, this is a crazy word for recent-ish grads to even think about, but the word is retirement. And it seems like something only your parents do, and yet it's something that in a lot of ways you can start and probably should start planning for, at least in part, right when you get going in the real world. Can you talk about wrapping your head around that and what people should think about if they're in that situation?
Yes, absolutely. So, when you are in your 20s, retirement seems so far away because it is. I mean, with the average age of retirement being 62 for women and 64 for men. I mean, for some of us in our 20s, that's like 40 years from now. That's way down the line. It's just in the back of your mind. But it's so important to start saving as soon as you can, because saving earlier means you can accumulate wealth easier. And it's also easier to save a little bit earlier versus a lot later. And you need way more money when you're retired than you think you do. You need around 80% of your final pre-retirement income to live comfortably. So let's say you retired and you were making around $100,000 a year. You would need around $80,000 per year for each year of your life that you stop working. That's a lot of money. And so it's really, really important to start saving as soon as you can. And if your work offers, a 401k, take advantage of it. And there are some things that you need to consider when you start planning for retirement. You will need to consider your age and the age that you plan to retire. But it's okay if you don't know that, because I don't know that yet, because that's a really long way for me. And you'll also need to consider your income and how much you can right now afford to set aside. And that obviously seems very, very daunting to think about. And if you're lost, that's okay. You can speak to a financial advisor and they can help you map out a plan to start saving for retirement.
So you just mentioned some numbers and a letter that maybe the average person doesn't know about 401k, or they've probably heard about it, but they don't really know what it means. Can you talk about 401k specifically and what that means?
Yes. So when I graduated, I really had no idea what a 401k was. I always heard people talk about it.
It sounds cool though, right? I mean,
it sounded very grown up, honestly.
Yeah, I feel like I should have one of those. Tell me more about it. Yeah.
So a 401k is an employer-sponsored retirement plan. And so you designate a portion of your paycheck to contribute to that plan. And it's pre-tax, which means that's before taxes are taken out of your paycheck. And you're not taxed until the funds are withdrawn. And so if you're young and you're just starting to save for retirement, a 401k is a great choice to start because of employer matching.
So employer matching, that's another important thing to factor in,
Yes.
especially when you're looking now in the job market. We know how competitive it is right now, and companies are offering a lot of incentives to try and get the best talent. And that's something that might be, buried deep in a list of benefits that's important. So can you talk about what 401k matching is from your employer and where that fits into this puzzle?
Yes. So 401k matching is a very, very helpful and fantastic benefit that a lot of mid to large size companies offer. So when an employer matches your contributions, they will add a certain amount to your 401k based on how much you contribute annually. So your employer, for example, a lot of them will match 100% of your contributions up to a certain percentage. So what that means is, let's say if your employer offers to match 100% up to a maximum of 3% of your annual income. So if you earn $60,000 a year, then the maximum amount that your employer would contribute is $1,800. And in order to maximize that contribution, you need to also contribute $1,800. If you contribute more, then that amount won't go unmatched. But if you contribute, $1,800, then your employer will also match that. And that's basically free money. So if you don't take
Mhm.
advantage of that, you are essentially leaving free money on the table that can help you save for retirement quicker.
What's another thing too that is often it's a choice for a lot of employees, and I know for at my company, for example, you can choose how much to contribute up to 6%,
Mhm.
and so I maxed that out at that 6%, and then they match at 3. So you get, and it's almost for a lot of people, it's also a sliding scale of sorts, where depending on how much you put in, that's how much your employer will match. So this is something that I asked my dad to help me with this because he's a finance guy. But
Yes.
that's another thing to consider is that some of these things aren't just automatically triggered. You have to opt in or make decisions about what level you want to contribute.
Yes, exactly. So, you have to decide how much you're going to contribute. And, it depends really, like how much your employer contributes depends on how much you opt in to contribute to. So you want to, if you can, max out that contribution.
Let's talk about more names and numbers that people might not understand. Actually, there's no numbers in Roth IRA; it's just letters. But Roth IRA, I remember again when I'm even just getting, right when I got out of college, my dad said, "We're going to take it. We're going to put all this into your Roth IRA." I said, "That sounds great. What is that?" And there's also, I think there's a lot of similarities between your Roth IRA and your 401k. So can you talk about the Roth IRA and then contrast that for us?
Yeah. So, like a 401k, a Roth IRA allows you to save for retirement and it allows your savings to grow tax free. But there are some differences in tax treatment and investment options and, whether or not your employer will contribute. So, the main difference between a Roth IRA and a 401k is that Roth IRAs are not sponsored by your employer. You have to set up a Roth IRA with an investment firm. And the good thing is that withdrawals are tax free upon retirement age, but you don't get that employer match, unfortunately, because it's not it's not employer sponsored. So personally, if you're starting out and you really don't have a ton of money to put towards retirement, a 401k is a great choice because of that employer match. Roth IRAs, I mean, regardless, saving for retirement is essential. And, everybody's situation is different. But unfortunately, Roth IRAs don't have that employer match. So if you really are, struggling to set money aside for retirement, that might not be the best choice.
Can you talk about the way that these all work together too? Because now there's also SEP IRAs, and you have Roth IRAs, and you have your 401k. In what ways do all of these interact? Like, should you participate in as many as you can, or is it strategic depending on your particular situation?
It's definitely strategic depending on your situation for sure. Um, the really main ones that I know the most about are 401ks and Roth IRAs because those are just the most common two options that people think about. But it definitely really depends on you and your situation. So again, consulting with a financial advisor to determine which situation works best for you is definitely really helpful. And Georgia Zone actually offers free consultations at no obligation with a financial advisor.
Yeah, I think that'd probably be the next step is we've addressed a lot of what these things are. It's like, great, I still don't know how to do it. Well, that's a resource that Georgia Zone offers that it can help people with those questions. We actually had a question through our comment section, so thank you for chiming in for us. And it was one that we were going to get to anyway, because it's something that you hear all the time, but again, maybe don't know what it is in context or what to do about it, and that is credit scores. Let's start with what is your credit score? We'll take this from a base and build off it.
So your credit score essentially predicts how likely you are to pay off a loan. And it's based on a few factors, your bill paying history, how much unpaid debt you have right now, the number and type of loans you have. So if you have a credit card or a car loan, student loans, and how long you've had your accounts open. And so they're used to determine whether or not you're capable of taking on a loan.
How important is the credit score? Because I think especially if you're young and you don't have a lot of credit built, it's not like you did anything wrong. It's just
Yeah.
that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, most college students and post-grad students, a lot of them don't have credit scores, and that's perfectly fine. Because, when you're in college, you don't think about, you know, getting a credit card, or, your parents more often than not are able to help you out. And so credit scores are really important because they, determine, again, whether or not you can take on a loan, whether or not you'll be approved or denied. And it also helps determine your interest rate. So if you have a lower credit score, then you may be approved, but you'll have a really high interest rate, or you could be denied from the loan altogether. But if you have a higher credit score, then your interest rate will more likely be lower, and you're more likely to be approved.
So if I have a low credit score, obviously it's in my best interest to raise it, but you can't wave a magic wand and raise your credit score. Obviously, some of it has to do with time. Time is a big factor. But what are some other active measures people can take to improve their credit scores?
There are quite a few measures that you can take to raise your credit score. It sounds very daunting, again, but they're very easy measures that you can take. For example, you can become an authorized user on your parents' credit card. If they use their credit card responsibly, make on-time monthly payments, and don't, use a ton of their available credit, then that could really help boost your credit score. But you want to make sure that the issuer reports authorized users to the credit bureaus. Otherwise, it won't count. And you can also apply for a secured credit card. And the secured credit card is very similar to a regular credit card, but it requires you to provide a deposit up front that would be equivalent to your credit line. And the issuer would keep your deposit in case you don't pay the bill. But if you use that card responsibly and make on-time payments, then you'll eventually build enough credit to graduate to a normal credit card, and you more often than not will get your deposit back. So for example, you get a secured credit card that has a $500 credit line. You would give the issuer $500 to secure your card, and so that would be your credit limit. So if you use less than 30% of your available credit, just use it for gas and groceries, and then you can graduate to a regular card if you're making on-time payments.
So it's interesting because what you just described, to me, I think in my head, that's a debit card, right? If this is the amount of money I have and I have this card and I swipe it and it declines, pulls from that balance. But I guess the difference here would be that the secured credit card would actually help you build your credit,
yes,
whereas using a debit card does not. Is that correct?
Exactly. Using a debit card, I mean, that money's coming from your checking account. It doesn't help you build your credit. But a secured credit card, when you're making on-time payments, it reports to the credit bureau, and so you will then raise your credit credit score, and you can graduate to a regular credit card eventually. And there are a few more other ways you can raise your credit score. You can also request a credit limit increase if you're confident you won't turn that into debt. That is the key thing. A lot of people will get credit limit increases and then think, oh, that's more money that I can spend. But in reality, the debt just starts snowballing to a point where you can't pay it off. So if you're confident that you won't turn that credit limit increase into more debt, you can request that, because if you have more credit available to you and you don't run a high balance, then your credit score will increase.
It's funny, there's almost a catch-22 to this, and you sort of described it in the sense that a lot of people want to apply for credit cards. They say, oh, they get denied because you don't have enough credit. It's like, well, how do I build credit? I'll get a credit card. So we're going in a circle, right? So that's where I know a lot of financial institutions I know do offer, or like beginner cards. I don't know if it's specifically a secured card like you're talking about, but there are ways to get in. You might not get the best credit card you want that has all the perks right out of the gate, but there's almost always, everybody has to start somewhere. I think that's universally recognized. So there are options. There just might not always be the ones that are, flashy and advertised all over TV.
Exactly. There are options for everybody. There's a secured card Georgia Zone offers a secured card, and we also offer student credit cards. So that's also really helpful for even current college students to start building their credit.
Again, we are taking your questions. We are joined by Ashley Bird today from Georgia Zone. And these are, again, beginner questions. We're going right to the core here of what are these questions that people have? How can we try and help them answer them and have some fun in the process? You talked about interest rates and making sure that you're not getting yourself buried under debt. Can you talk about interest rates as it relates to credit cards? There's a few, but talk about it as it relates to credit cards and why that's important to people.
So there are credit cards tend to have higher interest rates because there are so many situations where people can't pay off their debt. And so there are higher interest rates, and there's different interest rates too that vary with credit cards. There's just the regular interest rate for, if you're making on-time payments or late payments. There's also an interest rate for cash advances, which you kind of want to avoid. That's essentially taking your credit card and withdrawing cash in place. So those tend to have higher interest rates.
We have another question coming from our comments, which this is a very relevant question when we're talking about recent grads, student loans. This is a very newsworthy topic. I know there's a lot happening right now on the national level discussing student loans and the debt that causes people. So let's talk about student loans sort of as a baseline. Where do I even start trying to pay that off, especially factoring it into what we talked about right at the start of this, which is creating a budget and trying to figure out, how you allocate everything?
Yes. So, right now, certain federal student loan payments are on pause through the end of August, but in the chance that they're not forgiven or the payment pause isn't extended, you really need to have a plan in place to start paying off your student loans. And I know it's scary, I promise, but there are lots of tools that can help you figure out what repayment plans are best for you. It's studentaid.gov/loan-simulator. They offer a tool. You can estimate your monthly student loan payment and see what repayment plans are available. It recommends a payment plan based on your needs and goals. It helps you explore other options. So when you graduate, most borrowers are enrolled in a standard repayment plan, and that's just a fixed amount that ensures your loans are paid off between 10 to 30 years. But that's not the only repayment plan available. There are a couple more really common repayment plans that work for other people based on their situation. There's a graduated repayment plan, which is eligible for all federal loan borrowers. And the payments start small, and then every couple of years, they begin to increase. So you can make sure you pay off your loan between 10 to 30 years. There's also an income-based repayment plan. So if you have really high debt that's relative to your income, then the payments are around 10 to 15% of your income after taxes and other necessities like rent or mortgage.
Another specific question that came from the comments was, does paying off student loans boost your credit score? Are those two things tied together?
Yes, actually. So if you are making on-time payments for your student loans, that can help your credit score. And likewise, if you don't make those payments, your credit score will be damaged. You really want to avoid defaulting, which means you're not making the payments that are outlined in your loan's term. So when you default, your credit score will be damaged. You can owe even more money, and the servicer can collect money from you like your tax refund. So when you're not making the student loan payments, your credit score can be hurt.
I just had this thought, and we're talking a lot about credit scores. Where does it start? I mean, does it start, are you born with you get your social security card and you also have a credit score of, X? I mean, are you building up from it? Does it start at this level at a certain age and go down? I never thought about that until this moment, but I guess that, it's relevant to the student loan payments because we're talking about your credit score being something that you start establishing once you're out in the real world. But I imagine it's going much earlier than that.
So actually, I kind of have a real life situation. that kind of revolves around that. So my fiance was going to buy a car, and growing up, he really didn't have these conversations about money with his parents. He didn't have a credit score. He didn't have any credit at all. He went to try and get a car. He had the money, but because he didn't have any credit, he was not like his credit score was zero, non-existent. So it's not like he had bad credit. He didn't have any debts or anything. He just didn't have any credit. And so he had to get a credit card and, start building his credit. And his parents actually had to co-sign on his car loan in order for him to be approved because he had no credit at all. So it essentially starts at zero, and then you have to work your way up.
And it starts when you have your first account. That would be, so if I'm zero and then I'm added as an authorized user to my parents' credit card, would that then start building that score? Like, I'm thinking about the cliffhanger game from The Price is Right. The little guy goes up the mountain and then tries to avoid falling. I'm just thinking, like, you're starting here and you guys slowly go up. And I guess that clock, so to speak, the score starts being counted when you establish something that's reported to credit bureaus. Is that right?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. That's something that I didn't even know that. I just found that out right now.
I didn't know it either until he went to apply for a car. I had no idea, because growing up,
it's directly affecting you. Yeah.
So growing up, like my parents had me co-signed on my car, and I had a student credit card because my parents, wanted to make sure that I had started building credit at an early age. So that way, by the time I graduated, I had a nice established credit history and, a history of on-time payments.
I think when people they think about their credit score and loans, I imagine they automatically would think about credit card debt and things like that. But you also talked about student loans are relevant. If you have car payments, if you have a mortgage, I mean, that's also a loan, that's a loan, that's a debt. But there's good debt, like having a mortgage, like you want to have a mortgage, actually is a helpful thing to have as long as you're paying it. But I do think there's other things. Maybe people don't think about the scope of credit score and the various pieces that make that up.
Even like some apartment complexes report on-time payments to credit bureaus to help boost your credit.
Yeah. And that kind of takes me to another area I wanted to talk about, which is housing. It's been such an interesting few years in the housing market, because once we got into COVID, all of a sudden the housing market was going wild because interest rates got really low and everybody then wanted to buy. Now interest rates are going back up quickly, but interest rates, as we talk about them relative to a mortgage, different than interest rates on your credit card. So you're not paying 25%, maybe the interest rate on your credit card. You're not going to get a mortgage at 25%. I guess, can you talk about interest rates as they relate to ownership of cars, houses, etc.?
Yeah. So with a credit card, you're really only paying interest if you do not make your payment in full. So as long as you're making your payment in full, you don't have to pay interest. But every month,
payment in full, not the minimum payment, but
not
paying off
the minimum
your balance.
payment,
Right.
Not the minimum payment. So a lot of people will think, oh, I made the minimum, $35 payment, I'm okay. No, you're not. You need to be making the full payment. Otherwise, you're going to be faced with those really high credit card interest rates. But with a mortgage, the interest rates really are around, I think they're around 4 to 5% now. It depends, I think, obviously, on your credit score. Your interest rate depends on your credit score. So you're paying that each month, though, in addition to the principal amount. And same with your car. You'll pay a principal amount plus interest, but it's nowhere near as high as interest for your credit cards.
Yeah. Well, it's good to point out too, because as you noted, you can see minimum payment and you think, oh, okay, I'm doing that, I'm fine. No one's calling me or complaining. But another thing that most, I think, issuers do at this point, and we're at a stage now where, again, we talked about a lot of these app-based financial organizations where things have been simplified. There's, they have like fun graphs that show you how your credit score changed. Here are the factors that went into it. Usually it'll show you on your credit card bill, if you make the minimum payment, it will take X amount of time to pay off the full balance. But I do think there's a sense of, oh, I have my credit limit. That means I can spend that amount of money. But I mean, this is personal practice. I think you would agree with. It's good to think of your credit card like a debit card and don't spend money that you don't have, because then you're getting into that huge interest you're talking about, usually 20 to 30%. That's what will bury you in credit card debt, especially.
Exactly. Spending the money that you don't have is one of the biggest causes of debt. You get a credit card and you see that you have an $8,000 limit and you think, oh, that's $8,000 that I can spend.
I'm gonna go buy a car.
Right? Like,
a used car.
You don't want to, if you don't want to be spending all of that $8,000. You want to, at maximum, keep it around maybe $2,000. You want to use around 20 to 30% of your credit, because that's something you can hopefully easily pay off. And also, using less of your available credit boosts your credit score. So yeah, credit cards, as long as you use them and pay off the balance in full, they're a really, really helpful tool.
Again, we're taking your questions. We have a few more minutes here with Ashley Bird from Georgia Zone Credit Union. I think there's different ways to approach this, and this is something I was turned on to shortly after I graduated, and I kind of went all in on it. But there's a lot of perks with credit cards, and that's another way to take advantage of it, where you say, okay, well, if I don't want to spend money I don't have, maybe I'll just use a debit card. But then usually debit cards, you're not getting cash back, you're not getting points. That's something that, pretty much every credit card at this point will offer you something like that. So that's a way that essentially it could be free money if you're responsible and you're not spending money you don't have. Credit cards can really be an asset as well in terms of building up other perks. And, maybe it's building cash back towards something, maybe a trip, or it'll help you buy a gift card or something. So I talk about that and evaluating rewards opportunities and credit card benefits.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different credit cards that offer, different rewards for people. There's some that are just really good at earning cash back points. There's some that are really good at earning travel points, like there's different travel credit cards. There's some that are for certain airlines, some that apply to all travel. And a lot of these credit cards will offer like introductory bonuses. So if you spend a certain amount within 90 days of opening, you'll earn even more points that you can put towards cash back, gift cards, or a trip. I know a lot of people, they'll get a credit card and they will spend the amount that's required in the 90 days, and they'll use those points towards a trip that they've been wanting to take, buying airline tickets or putting it towards hotels.
Yeah. And it's good to know too, because I think a lot of people it's easy to think of financial institutions as, as predatory, right? And it's like, oh, you always hear about these things where, oh, it feels like they're coming after me, they're trying to take advantage of me. But again, if you're responsible, there are a lot of ways that the system can work very well for you and your family and your significant others, et cetera.
Exactly. It's the key here is really just making sure that you're using your credit card responsibly and making sure that you're paying on time and in full.
We did have a comment asking about some more information about federal student loan aid. What details can you share about those programs and how they might be an asset to people?
That is something that I would probably need to look into.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can 100% confidently answer that right now, because I don't want to give any inaccurate information. So that's something that we could look into and get back to them about.
And we can share that. We will share the link to that in the comments here in a few minutes for the person who wanted that information. What else have we not covered? I think we've done pretty much everything. I'm trying to think of any other questions or things that recent-ish grads might be curious about. Anything else you think we haven't covered that is, or maybe something else that's popped up that you didn't think about earlier when we started?
I mean, I feel like we've really covered a lot of the basic questions that people have after they graduate. I mean, I had all the questions about saving for retirement and, credit scores and, how to boost your credit. I had all of those questions when I graduated. And, I think we've covered all of the basics. I don't know.
Well, and if someone's watching this and they say, okay, well, you guys have posed all kinds of questions that you're making me ask. Who do I ask these questions to? Can you share some more information about the resources that Georgia Zone has for people that are now trying to get some answers and, again, take some of these concepts and relate it to themselves and their current financial situation?
So, like I mentioned earlier, if you are, really not sure about planning for retirement and you need help with that, we offer financial advisor consultations at no cost and no obligation. And you can visit georgiazone.org/investment dash and dash retirement dash services. We'll put these links in the comments. And then Georgia Zone also offers a bunch of different free financial education modules that are on various topics like buying a car or owning a home, different tools that you need every day. And there are a bunch of free modules that you can go through. And we will also put the link to that in the comments as well.
So the answer to those questions, check the links. We will provide the links in the comments. And again, the team from Georgia Zone is always happy to help on this. And that's why we like to give this information, make you think about some questions that maybe you hadn't quite pondered, but are important to start focusing on. Because if you are a recent-ish grad and you're watching this, you are in the real world now, and it can be complicated, but there are resources and you do have allies locally that are here to help. And that's, again, one of the main things we always want to get across in these Facebook Live sessions about various topics. There are people there to help you, and especially Georgia Zone, they're happy to have these conversations and get you on the right track. So Ashley, I think we've covered everything. As the recent-ish grad, thank you so much for all this information today. Again, if you have questions that we didn't address, number one, I'd be very curious what they are, because I think we did just about everything, unless you have something incredibly specific. But you can comment below, even if you're watching this long after this has ended, and someone from the Georgia Zone social media team will respond to you and address those questions. So Ashley, thank you. Thanks to Maren for running us on the social side today, and we look forward to seeing everybody in a few months for our next Facebook Live. We will give you more financial tips to help your future.